Welcome to hour number 2, live right here on the early line on SportsGrid, all across that SportsGrid network. I am Ben Stevens. Donnie Rightside, of course, is here as well. And joining us now ahead of day number 2 of Big Ten Media Days, it is Rhett Lewis, the host of Believe in Big Ten, a former Indiana wide receiver, here to handicap and break down the Big Ten Conference in the expanded and realigned league as we get ready for the 2024 college football season. Rhett, we appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us bright and early on this Wednesday morning on the early line.
My pleasure, guys. And Donnie, that's usually the response that I get when people are like, whoa, you played at IU? They're like, whoa, really?
Ooh. No, the wide receiver, the wide receiver.
We got two former college wide receivers and a backup high school quarterback breaking down some Big Ten ball live right here on a Wednesday morning. So, Rhett, of course, one of the storylines entering this season in 2024 across college football is expansion from a conference perspective from the college football playoff in all of the realignment we have in store. In the Big Ten, it's the 4 West Coast newcomers: Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington. Rhett, when you look at these 4 new member institutions in the Big Ten, whether it's stylistically on the field, whether it's just the new additions of programs, how do you think these 4 schools reshape the landscape in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I mean, I think it expands the footprint, obviously. I mean, it is a coast-to-coast conference. But, I have heard from some schools that it has allowed some schools that weren't already, let's say, out west with a recruiting footprint, that it has allowed them to open themselves up to kids they may not normally have been trying to go after on the recruiting front. So there's that piece of it. And then there's the gameplay piece of it. I asked Greg Schiano, head coach at Rutgers, that very question yesterday while he was here at Big Ten Media Days, and he thinks that the stylistic part with, a gritty physical offensive line or, defensive line type of game in the trenches is a little bit overrated when it comes to those 4 teams trying to, integrate themselves into Big Ten play. So, we'll see what that's all about. But I think these teams are going to bring a ton of electricity. I mean, Oregon could very well win the dang conference this year. I mean, that's how good that roster is. And when they play Ohio State this year in the regular season, we might be talking about a Big Ten championship game preview.
Yeah, the footprint is massive now. And also, you're taking a look at some really historic programs. You get Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington into the equation. Talk to me about this, too, because so many times in the past, I know it's changed now, and the offenses are much, much different than what we used to see in the Big Ten. But is there any sort of, mesh point where it's like, okay, the Big Ten is here, the Pac-12 is coming over, and talk about some of these schools coming into the Big Ten, and will that play continue, or will they adapt to more of a Big Ten style, per se?
Yeah, I think they're going to do what fits their personnel, and I think that's what the best offensive coordinators in college football and in football in general do is look, we've got foundational principles, right? We are always going to be a team that, that's going to try to, win short yardage situations. We want to be explosive. We want to push the ball down the field. But, look, we're going to accommodate the skill sets of the guys, that we have on our roster. I'll give you an example. I was with Dylan Gabriel down at the Manning Passing Academy, who's the best quarterback in the conference in Oregon's first year in the conference right now, and his first year at Oregon. And he was talking about how Bo Nix's production was very, appealing to him. And, obviously a veteran team, a really talented team was appealing to him to go to Oregon from OU. But he thinks that they're going to incorporate a little bit more of their offense to allow for his ability to read defenses and work through progressions. And so I think maybe we see a little bit less of the get the ball out of your hands, super quick Oregon type offense that we saw, the last 2 years with Bo Nix. So I think there are some adjustments, but I think that's more to personnel and more to, the guys that are on this roster.
And Dylan Gabriel, a co-favorite in his opening year in Eugene already in the preseason to win the Heisman Trophy, a plus 750 number. Word on the street in Indianapolis, it was Rhett Lewis and Dylan Gabriel pushing the large inflatable duck into the White River in Indy yesterday ahead of Big Ten Media Days. And Rhett, from the odds perspective, you see where Oregon stacks up. First year in the Big Ten, but second best price, only behind Ohio State to win the conference. Of course, with the realigned league, no more divisions, no East versus West in Indianapolis for a conference championship. How does that change the race for a conference title in the Big Ten?
Well, I think it opens it up, right? I think all those, I think it opens it up for, teams outside of the Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, old Big Ten East to, really make some, especially, out there in the West too, where you had kind of a jumble of teams a lot of times at 9 and 10 wins. I think that this opens it up for, a team like Iowa, right? Who, even despite their issues on offense, has had the ability to win 10 games, most of Kirk Ferentz's tenure, especially the last 10 years. So I think you'll see teams, outside of that spectrum really have a shot. And I think you'll see more Penn State opportunities there, guys. I think you'll see, Wisconsin have an opportunity to make some hay. And then obviously the teams out West, like let's see what USC, can do with Miller Moss. And then we'll, have an idea of where we're going to be when those top two teams come calling to come to Indianapolis, which was just announced for the next 4 years will be the home of the Big Ten championship game.
By the way, Rhett, if we are looking at, I do love that. If we're looking at the top of the standings here, Ohio State, nothing worse than an Ohio State fan watching Michigan beat them and then go on to a national championship. So it's very rare to say, okay, it's been a while since Michigan has won a championship. Ohio State coming into the season, more mounting pressure on that franchise, as I like to call it here, because they're usually guys on the top of the mountain here. Now looking up at Michigan, knowing Michigan has a ring from last year.
Yeah, and I think they are embracing those expectations. I mean, Ryan Day stood up at the podium yesterday and was like, look, I know we got to win them all. And I mean, he is very aware of the mounting, pressure from outside. I do think he does a great job at not letting that affect him. Now, you could say that it did affect him, in the transfer portal because he went nuts. Right, getting some of the best players out there. Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins. I mean, like they went crazy. And then they did a better job, in my opinion, than anybody in the country in keeping their best players in Columbus. And it's not like they were trying to leave to go to another collegiate program. He kept them from going to the draft. Burks at corner, Travion Henderson at running back, Emeka Buka at wide receiver, talking about guys, who would have been first round, second round picks there. They've got the best backfield situation in America right now with Judkins and Travion Henderson. And I think Will Howard, guys, is going to be elevated in a huge way. I talked to him just a couple of weeks ago, and he was absolutely thrilled with the coaching that he is getting at Ohio State. And he didn't want to necessarily say, wasn't that at Kansas State, but you could read between the lines there. I mean, like I think his ceiling is really big with this talented skill set and with a really talented coaching staff around him to get the most out of him.
A new offensive coordinator to boot, a very familiar name in the Big Ten and, of course, in college football, that being Chip Kelly. Ohio State saw Michigan win a national championship and said, never again over our dead body. But speaking of the Maize and Blue, the reigning national title winners, Rhett, they enter this year with a win total of 8.5 and still the fourth best price to win a national or to win the Big Ten Conference. When you look at Michigan, so much change from last year. A lot of the roster is gone. Of course, Jim Harbaugh is gone. But in the final minute of this segment, what does Michigan do for an encore as the reigning national title winners?
Well, I think they probably, find a way to run it 38 straight times in the second half at some point. I mean, like that is still the formula. Sharon Moore is still, after, growing up with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan and now leading that program. I mean, that's going to be, I certainly think, his style as well. And I think that's why we could end up seeing a player like Jack Tuttle end up at quarterback, a guy who, has been around the block a couple of times in college football, but is a veteran presence, understands what's asked of him, and they're going to, find a way. He's going to allow them to stay in games and use that physical run game. So I think as that battle rages on, I think that's something to watch out for.
Rhett Lewis, we appreciate the time. Enjoy Indianapolis. More on the early line up next.